What if I told you there's a bombing raid deadlier than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined? Imagine a city engulfed in flames, a nation shattered by the aftermath. Welcome to a story of devastation and resilience. Today we delve into the brutal bombing of Tokyo in 1945, often overlooked, but marking one of the darkest chapters in human history. The most brutal attack ever, the night of the Black Snow. The bombing resulted in a massive conflagration that created a blackened sky filled with ash and soot. This darkened, snow-like fallout covered the city, giving the night its eerie, somber nickname. The destruction was immense, with a significant portion of Tokyo being burned to the ground. In early 1945, Allied air raids had heavily damaged major German cities, including Berlin, Dresden, and Hamburg. Just a few months later, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would occur, becoming the most well-known bombings of World War II. While these bombings caused immense casualties, with an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 civilian deaths in each German city, Hiroshima suffering 70,000 immediate deaths, and Nagasaki exceeding 40,000, another devastating bombing has faded from memory. This forgotten attack, the bombing of Tokyo on the night of March 9, 1945, resulted in the deadliest single air raid in history, killing over 100,000 people. Before delving into this tragic event, let's explore the context of the bombing in more detail. In response to the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor 4 months earlier, the United States launched the first air raid on Japanese capital Tokyo on April 18, 1942. This daring mission, known as the Doolittle Raid, involved 16 American B-25 bombers taking off from the aircraft carrier Hornet. The key challenge was the lack of a nearby base to launch from. Unlike later in the war with captured islands like Saipan and Iwo Jima, the bombers had to be launched 1,100 kilometers from Japan. Due to limited fuel capacity and the need to withdraw the Hornet after launch, the bombers wouldn't be able to return. The crews faced a risky one-way trip, aiming for emergency landings in China or the Soviet Union. Despite the immense difficulties, including anti-aircraft fire and potential interception by Japanese fighters, the raid achieved its objective. While the damage to Tokyo was minimal, the attack served a significant purpose. It shattered Japan's sense of invincibility and boosted American morale, symbolizing revenge for Pearl Harbor. This successful raid marked the beginning of a more extensive strategic bombing campaign against Japan. As the tide of the Pacific War turned, it became increasingly clear that Japan lacked the resources to defeat the Americans. A crucial turning point came with the American victory in the Battle of the Marianas in 1944, particularly the capture of Saipan. This provided the U.S. with vital air bases roughly 2,300 kilometers from Tokyo. The arrival of the B-29 Superfortress bomber further bolstered American capabilities. With a range of about 6,000 kilometers, the B-29 could finally reach the Japanese mainland directly. Before this, bombing raids relied on planes stationed in northern China, which were limited in effectiveness. Traditionally, the U.S. favored precision bombing of military targets and infrastructure. However, the desire to end the war quickly led to a shift towards area bombing of Japanese cities. This tactic aimed to cripple Japanese industry and demoralize the civilian population, forcing a surrender. While B-29s had the range for Japan from the Marianas, escort fighters initially lacked the same reach. This meant bombers faced high losses without fighter protection. However, B-29s could fly at high altitudes, around 9 kilometers, where Japanese defenses were ineffective. The drawback was that strong winds at such heights made precision bombing difficult. Citing the difficulty of targeting military installations at high altitudes, the U.S. adopted area bombings of cities in late 1944. Additionally, capturing islands closer to Japan like Iwo Jima in March 1945 provided crucial forward bases for escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang to protect B-29s on their raids. Just 2 years before the firebombing of Tokyo, a team of scientists at Harvard University developed a horrifying weapon, napalm. This incendiary gel adhered to buildings and skin, causing rapid and devastating fires. Most homes in Japan were constructed of wood and paper, making them especially vulnerable to napalm. The gel bombs were designed to explode upon impact, ensuring the burning material would spread throughout a building. With temperatures reaching 1,000 degrees Celsius, napalm could melt and disintegrate nearly anything in its path. B-29 bombers could carry a massive payload of napalm bombs, estimated to be around 1,520 per aircraft. While earlier bombardments of Tokyo with conventional bombs proved largely ineffective, the potential of napalm promised a new level of destruction. While the Battle of Iwo Jima neared its conclusion in March 1945, the US launched a massive firebombing raid on Tokyo. A fleet of 335 B-29 bombers took off from the Mariana Islands, stripped of unnecessary weight to maximize bomb capacity. Estimates suggest they carried a staggering 450,000 to 500,000 napalm bombs. Due to the absence of Japanese fighter defense, the bombers descended to a lower altitude of 2,000 meters for a more accurate attack. The first bombs fell just past midnight, catching the city completely off guard. The sirens didn't sound until 7 minutes later. By that time, a torrent of over 1,600 tons of napalm had already begun raining down. Entire neighborhoods were quickly engulfed in flames. Prior attempts to create fire breaks by demolishing homes proved useless against the widespread nature of the napalm attack. Firefighters, many of them young boys, due to the war effort, were overwhelmed and largely ineffective. Similar to German cities earlier in the war, Tokyo's civilian population now bore the brunt of the conflict. The American strategy aimed to crush morale and undermine faith in the Japanese government and emperor. The strong northerly winds fueled the inferno, spreading the flames southward across a vast area. The scattered pattern of bombing left many civilians trapped and unable to escape the immolation. The night of March 9th was a nightmare for Tokyo's civilians. Those who sought refuge underground were often burned or suffocated as the intense heat, exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, turned even concrete structures into ovens. People attempted desperate escapes, but most were tragically unsuccessful. One horrifying detail recounts victims drowning in the city's Sumida River, unable to escape the inferno's reach. As dawn arrived on March 10th, the survivors emerged to a scene of utter devastation. 25 square kilometers of the city lay completely leveled, filled with charred and unrecognizable bodies. Women, men, and children perished in the thousands. A photographer documented the horrifying aftermath, but these images were never published in Japan, perhaps in an attempt to shield the public from the true cost of the attack. Identifying the victims proved nearly impossible due to the severity of the burns. Estimates suggest that between 100,000 and 150,000 Japanese civilians lost their lives during this single night. This surpasses the death tolls of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and any German city bombing throughout the war. In contrast, the Americans only lost 14 bombers. This attack marked the beginning of a series of devastating firebombings on other Japanese cities, resulting in hundreds of thousands of casualties and the destruction of vast urban areas. The firebombing of Tokyo left Japan in a state of utter devastation. Beyond the horrific human cost, the attack served as a stark reminder of the country's crumbling defenses. With defeats piling up on all fronts, it became clear that Japan lacked the capacity to resist further. The bloody Battle of Okinawa, ending in June 1945, foreshadowed the planned invasion of the Japanese mainland. However, this never materialized. Instead, a series of brutal firebombings continued throughout the summer, culminating in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in early August. Confronted with the relentless assault by Allied forces and the Soviet Union's entry into the war, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. The devastating impact of the atomic bombings on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, combined with the increasing pressure from the Soviet military operations, left Japan with little choice but to capitulate. This marked the end of a brutal and protracted conflict that had caused immense suffering and loss of life on both sides. The necessity of the atomic bombings in securing Japan's surrender remains a topic of ongoing historical debate. Some historians argue that Japan was already on the brink of surrender due to the extensive conventional bombings and the naval blockade that impeded its ability to continue the war. Others contend that the overwhelming shock and destruction caused by the atomic bombs were decisive in compelling Japan to surrender swiftly, thereby potentially saving countless lives that would have been lost in a prolonged conflict. The complex interplay of military strategy, geopolitical considerations, and human cost continues to fuel discussions about this pivotal moment in history. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this video, click on the next one shown on the screen. I'm sure you'll like it. Thanks for watching.